So, Ambassador Woś, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We want to ask you to make a few opening comments on our topic today, which is freedom, and then we're going to go to questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Kathy and Janine. Hi, I know I'll see you in a minute on the screen. And it is really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I did want to thank you for bringing everyone to the Victims of Communism Museum. I encourage everyone to bring their family, friends, and allies and detractors to the museum. To give a plug for the museum, in the world of museums, it is called a jewel box museum. So something that is tiny but extremely impactful. It is done in new technology, so in a very clever way of presenting history and information. And an interesting concept they had, because how do you create a museum about communism when it stretches the entire geographical world and, a century? How do you do the rooms? How do you establish it? And what they did is they put the entire content into 3 rooms. So the first room is revolution. The second is repression. And the third is resistance. So it's a very clever way of presenting information. So again, thank you for taking everyone there. And also, we at IWP, at my graduate school of National Security Intelligence and International Affairs here in DC, we also take our interns to have our lectures and collective lectures over at VOC. So I would encourage everyone to check out both VOC and IWP for the future. But to start with, Kathy, I wanted to thank you very much for inviting me, and also thank you for working on the portfolio of education, you do absolutely critical work in ensuring that everyone is well educated about our country, about our heritage, and really about freedom. And because we're coming close to the 4th of July, it's a very appropriate topic. So you did mention my personal history, and I'd like to perhaps expand on that. I was truly born into a Catholic family in Poland that was under communist rule. And for those who are history buffs and just basic knowledge, my grandparents were born into a free and democratic, independent Poland, one of the oldest democracies in Europe. But World War I happened, and my grandparents, as youngsters, were taken prisoner as slave labor from Poland to Germany. This is World War I. They survived, and then they came back to Poland to continue to fight for their free and democratic and independent country. If you can imagine the horror, those same grandparents, World War II happened. And all of a sudden, those two, now with a family of their own, with their own children, with 4 children, ended up fighting again for the freedom of their country, to maintain their independence, and found themselves fighting in World War II as Poland was both attacked by Germany and subsequently by Russia. So during World War II, my entire family, my grandparents, my parents, aunts, uncles, everyone was fighting in the army or in the Polish underground army, or in the scouting when they were very young, in order to try to maintain the freedom. In the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, which is a very, very historically significant uprising, where in 61 days, 250,000, mostly women and children, were slaughtered. My family was captured by the Germans. And so as Catholics, everyone was put into concentration camps. The women went to Ravensbrück and the men went to Flossenburg. My father was prisoner number 23,407. Now, my father survived and my grandfather survived the concentration camp because they were liberated by General Patton's United States Third Army. The women of the family who were in Ravensbrück at the end also survived, but not as easily. They were liberated by the Russian Red Army, and they were tortured, raped, and subsequently survived and managed on finding their way back to Poland, for the third time for my grandparents to try to again rebuild their free and democratic country. And I want to take a step back. Before my family was taken by the Germans to the concentration camps, and Poland was the only country during World War II when there was an instant death sentence to anyone who helped Jews in any way. If you gave water, papers, hiding, whatever, you and your family members and those around you were instantaneously shot. So my grandparents and my father risking their lives to go in and out of the Warsaw Ghetto that the Germans established and getting people out of there, because the Jews would have been doomed to death inside of the ghetto, and getting them out, risking their own lives, and then hiding them in various areas in Warsaw, including inside of the basements of certain diplomatic missions. Now, going to and for that, they're recognized by Israel at Bad Yashem as righteous Gentiles. Now, my mother was younger than my father, and my mother, during the first day of going to school in 5th grade, was walking to school, and she heard all sorts of noise and looked up, and there were planes. Poland was being attacked by Germany. First day of 5th grade. My mother was not able to go back to school until after the war. My mother, as a young child, her fate during World War II is she was physically ripped from the hands of her mother and taken to slave labor into a factory in Germany as a child. She also survived. So everyone after World War II wanted to, or during World War II and after World War II, everyone in Poland wanted to continue to fight for their country, for their freedom, for their constitution. But unfortunately, at Yalta, Poland's freedom and the freedom of millions without their consent was given away. President Roosevelt gave away the freedom of millions of people for what? Vain pursuit of stability. Because actually, he got nothing in return. The outcome of that action, of taking away people's freedom, is that the Soviet occupation of Poland under communist rule lasted in history 10 times longer than the Nazi German occupation of Poland during World War II. So, jumping up years, my family, my father, left absolutely everything behind his native country to come to the United States. For what reason? So that my brother, who's older than I am, and I would have an ability to grow up and live in a country where we were actually able to fulfill our God-given potential. Our Constitution in the United States guarantees us freedom that most of the world does not have. So to me, America represents freedom. America and its freedom of what? Freedom to believe. Freedom to believe and practice your own religion, whatever it is. Freedom to be able to say what you want to say. To be able to read what you want to read. Freedom to live and travel to where you want to travel and where you want to live. We in the United States have the freedom to have endless professional opportunities. That is not the case under communist rule. My father knew as a staunch anti-communist that my brother and I would never be able to get into university. Because during the years under communist rule, I lived in Poland. If you had a family member who was not in the Communist Party, you were either forbidden for going into university or special points and preferential treatment was given to those who were in the Communist Party. We would have never been able to get into the university because we lived in Warsaw, the capital, the city. If you lived outside of the city in farmlands, you were given preferential placement at the university. We would have never been able to get into the university because my father and mother were educated. If you weren't educated, you had special preferential treatment to enter the university. Then, if you did get in, and whatever profession that you were accepted into, you did not have the freedom. Oh, well, I'm going to find a job in New York City, or I'm going to find a job in California, or I'm going to work in the mountains of Asheville in North Carolina. You didn't have that ability because you were assigned where you were going to work by the government. So America offers freedoms that are incomprehensible to people who have just taken it for granted. So I and all of us know that freedom is not for free, and freedom is not permanent. So my suggestion to one of your opening questions, okay, what now? So I stress that every single one of us, every citizen of the United States needs to do their part. Each of us in a different way, each of us in whatever our capacity is, but we have to do our part. And what does it start with? One, education. We have to be able to learn or teach ourselves facts. Second, realities. And the second part, aside from education, is that I advocate for every single one of us to fulfill our civic responsibility that has been given to us, and that every single person goes to vote. If you do not, you are abdicating a gift that was given to you by our founding fathers. And they did that in the hope of ensuring that we will continue to hold on to this system and the freedoms and then respect them enough that we will pass it on to the next generation. So with that said, that's my opinion about freedom and about the United States. And I must say that I'm truly blessed now to be the president of the graduate school IWP, because we actually teach a lot of this here. We teach the principles of Western civilization. We teach the realities around us. And we teach facts so that we can use all the tools of statecraft in order to win, and hopefully win without war. So thank you, and I'm open to all questions.
Well, thank you. And that was beautiful. And when our listeners, we polled our listeners and we asked them why they celebrate America, and freedom was their top answer. And we just could not think of a better person than you to talk about freedom, just because of your family's history and all that you've done to advance the cause of freedom. And just thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to Janine. Janine?
Great. Oh, Ambassador, what a touching, moving story. Your legacy, your family's legacy, and you sit here as just a powerful example of a courage, and also of your familial line and your courage and their courage. And wow, we couldn't ask for a better representative to speak with us today about freedom. Yes, thank you so much. And what freedom really means. Kathy and I were talking about this earlier, that freedom, you know, we have it here. And it's sort of like, until you've lost it, you can't really understand what you've lost. And so we have it, and it becomes intangible, that people don't really understand, or they think it'll never happen here, You know, it's just never going to happen here. And this is a real wake up call. So I want to touch, you know, I have my certain allotted amount of time here to ask you questions, but I want to go back a little bit, because Tova and I were talking about the treaties and whatnot. I have an American exceptionalism talk show that I'm doing, and I interviewed Tova, and we talked about the treaties, and she may speak to this a little bit more after World War II. And it was really, you know, it's something that everybody knows, but you put it in such a way that it brought it home to everybody, and that you know, Hitler invaded, and you were taken over by Hitler. And we had a foreign exchange student that lived with us for a while from Poland, and she just talked about all the different constitutions and never about all the different leaders, and nobody knew what was what and whatever. But you had Hitler come in, but then if you'd been freed at that point, you know, but instead land was given to Stalin. So I would like to touch on that a little bit, because you said FDR gave the land to Stalin. So I want you to expand on that a little bit, because Russia fought in the war against, and not validating Russia at all, against Hitler. Of course, Great Britain did, and America did. And the three of them, and we've seen the pictures, you know, it was Stalin, FDR, and Churchill sat there. And, you know, they made a deal that's been controversial in many regions of the world since then. But it's really interesting to hear you talk about the fact that your land was given away then to Russia. But what I find interesting about this is that, talk to me a little bit about the position that diplomats would have been put in. And also, I'm really interested, I don't know that England, Great Britain got any lands. Maybe they did. I know America didn't get any land, which is typically what happens. The conqueror gets land. But then Russia did get land. And that's when they took over half of Germany and Poland and so many other places that then unfortunately fell under the communist rule. What's the history of that? What was that negotiation like? When you say FDR gave it away, is it that simple?
It is and it isn't, of course. But the realities are the following. Because of geography, the number one subject that should be studied by everyone, number one, is geography. Because geography shapes history, and history shapes current events. So geography. Because of Poland's geography, it was attacked on September 1st by Germany and 16 days later by Russia. So the country was attacked by two enemies simultaneously. So you're speaking about an independent country with independent international borders that is attacked by two enemies simultaneously, is fighting a war against them, and it still wants to fight the war against them so that they go back to their freedom and independence and their country and their rules and regulations and law and whatever. And a good way of looking at it is go to current events, the Ukraine. The Ukraine, independent country with recognized international borders, another country comes in, Russia, and invades it. And now, is it up to the United States or somebody else, or China, to say, guys, we're going to call quits, and why don't we just, you guys take this part of the country and you guys take this part of the country? Well, is it really up to someone else to make a decision to take away other people's country, heritage, freedoms, and way of life? I would advocate no. You had all of the countries in Eastern Europe who wanted to continue to fight, but they weren't offered that opportunity. Their views were not taken into consideration.
When you say their views weren't taken into consideration, what time period are you talking about? Let's go back. When Russia took over, were they fighting Hitler when they invaded your country, or were they?
No, allegedly,
or were they just land grab?
Allegedly, they. Here's an example. During the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, that was like we have to get the Germans out of Warsaw. It's our last chance. Everyone come together. We're going to try to hold Warsaw together. And Warsaw is on a river. And so as the uprising started, the Germans came in to squash it and liquidate the uprising and Warsaw. The river is right there. The Russian Red Army, allegedly our ally, allegedly the ally of Poland, allegedly the enemy of Germany, stood there with its forces on the river, waiting till 250,000 people were slaughtered on the spot. And anyone who would go across the river to try to flee and go to the other part of Poland, which the Russians were right in, were just shot on that. So Russia was never our ally. Russia, when it invaded Poland, took a couple million people into Siberia, into their concentration camps, not just the Germans. So
at the end of the war, Russia felt like, not correctly, not justifiably, but they felt like they had gone in, and so they deserved those lands. It's just really interesting to me. Instead, I know FDR was kind of a part of it, but it's interesting that America took no land, right? We didn't take any land from anybody, but Russia did. Stalin did.
Concept, but that goes to another point in history. Each country is different. This is one thing that realities of the world that I'd like to make this point. Each of us are different. Culturally, religiously, based on our traditions in each of our countries. And if you take Russia, Russia since 1550, it was the Muscovite state originally. It was never free, it was never democratic in its entire history of existence, whatever name, Muscovite state, Soviet Union, Russia, it was never a democratic republic. 1550, they started to expand their land mass by 50 acres a day till 1941. And they ended up with 15 time zones by the end.
Okay, so because I'm limited in time here. How did FDR give away those lands?
Because why did he have the authority to say, dear Eastern Europe, we no longer want you to fight. We're no longer going to defend you. We're no longer going to work with you. We're going to have a peace treaty with the way we are, and we're going to let the Soviet Union, Russia now.
So what wasn't Churchill? Wasn't Churchill a part of that too then? So it was Churchill and yeah. So it wasn't just FDR, right?
It
okay.
wasn't.
So in essence, to wrap this up, I just find it, we could talk about this forever, and really today it's about freedom. And I think the goal of what we're talking about with freedom and what you've gone through, which is horrendous in your country, is how important defense is, right? Defense is so incredibly important, and diplomacy. And so I think that defense is a big part of a lot of our people that said freedom was number one. They said, my father was in the Air Force. My father was in the Army. My father was a West Pointer. He flew in the Air Force. Yeah. So, those people who want to poo-poo the military, a big part of freedom is being able to defend that freedom, which Ukraine hasn't been able to do, and we've been helping them. So I don't want to get bogged down in this because I need to pass and go on to other people, but I just thought I found it intriguing that you said FDR did it. So in conclusion, what would you have liked to have seen? You had Stalin there, who was this ruthless dictator, and Churchill was warning about him, and they had helped win the war. And you had Churchill and you had FDR there. What would you have liked for them to have told Stalin at that moment? And what outcome would you have liked to have seen? And this is my last question. What would you have wanted Churchill and FDR to have done? And I'm not asking that to prove a point. I'm asking that because I think it's a great historical lesson to look back and to say at the moment it could have been done differently.
Oh, it's because it's relevant to current events. You said, what would you have suggested that Churchill and America say to Russia? Easy. Go back to Russia. Go back.
Yeah.
Go back to where you came from. We're going to call it quits. Everyone go home. We're done. Same thing right now in the Ukraine. Same thing in the Ukraine.
Interesting.
Putin will not stop until he stops.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a fascinating discussion, and I'm going to toss to Tova now. I just think freedom, and I haven't seen a clock, so I don't know what my time is. I don't see a clock. You're supposed to be a clock. Maybe there is one. I just can't see it. But anyway, I thank you for this. I just think it's interesting. We can go back in history and learn about how things could have been done differently. But I want to close with just saying, from my time, you're just a hero as far as I'm concerned. Your family is. You're a great living example to teach and to speak and to be of service, like a steward of your wound, of what you and your family have gone through. And now you are in America making a big difference. And I just appreciate it very much, because freedom is what the number one thing. When we said celebrate America, the most people said freedom that watch our show. And I think that what I'm hearing from today is that how important the military is, and being able to defend yourself and making sure that's a real important aspect. So thank you. Yeah, I'm with you there. Okay, passing to Tova.
Hi, Ambassador. Again, thank you so
Tova.
much for being on. It was a really amazing introduction, and I have been to the Victims of Communism Museum. I had the privilege of going with Constituting America, and it's really an incredible museum, very impactful, very well done. So definitely everybody should go if you're in any proximity to DC, just plugging that as an unbiased third party, maybe a little biased. So I am in Budapest right now, as I mentioned. And so I've been thinking a lot about a lot of the themes you touched on in your opening remarks related to World War II, related to standing up for freedom, standing up for the rights of people. One diplomat, you were mentioning the role of diplomats and kind of upholding freedom and liberty. And in Budapest, one I've learned a lot about is Raoul Wallenberg, who I'm sure you've heard of, who was this hero he was a Swedish diplomat who moved to Budapest during the heat of World War II. And he was not Jewish, but was very instrumental in standing up for the Jewish population, using his diplomatic power to establish safe houses, make passes, and saved tens and tens of thousands of lives during World War II, and was unfortunately kidnapped by the Russians after the war. And his fate remains unknown. Actually, my father is the president of the independent investigation into his fate. So I kind of grew up hearing this story. He was an idol of mine and a big inspiration for me to get into politics and international relations. And I think he shows the power of diplomacy in, safeguarding lives. And he was educated in the US, even though he was Swedish. So my question is, what does the US do diplomatically to protect human rights abroad? How do we kind of stand up for our principles against regimes like the Nazis or maybe modern day autocrats, and uphold human rights and be a beacon for that?
It's, first of all, it's very, very complicated, obviously, because it's not black and white on anything when it comes to things going wrong. But we have to be able to know who we are as Americans, what we believe in, what our heritage is, in order to be able to then defend others. If we're not really sure who we are or what we believe in or what we stand for as Americans, it's very hard for us to face externally. First point. Second point is that in current events, we are surrounded by adversaries, and those adversaries have a mutual goal of wanting to win. But we have to ensure that we win them. And one of those ways is to be, again, firm representing ourselves towards others and being consistent. Not what happens now every 3 or 3.5 years, we bounce from like this, ping pong back and forth on our beliefs. We have to be firm. We are Americans. We believe in the bigger concept of freedom, so therefore personal freedom, individual rights of people. And when we look around us, and right now we have several wars all over the world. We have people in concentration camp by the millions in China, among other places in the world. And we don't even speak of it. If you think of it, I mean, is anyone in our current dialogue speaking about the millions that are imprisoned in China? It's not on anyone's dialogue. So your question was, how do we ensure, facing externally, that we fight for human rights? Well, we each need to do our part, whatever it is, whether it's stop going to Target and buying something plastic disposable made in China. I don't know. Each person should do their part on a small scale, and holding others responsible and accountable for when they cross the line of international laws and commit atrocities. We have to hold people accountable for it. In the case of World War II, the Soviet Union was never held accountable for its genocide. We never had Nuremberg trials against them. Here's an example. Or now we are putting a blind eye to the millions of people in China in concentration camps. It's now just called a different name, re-education camps, right? So I think it's very difficult, but the way I would answer that is we have to be consistent in our foreign policies, and we have to understand who we are, appreciate who we are, respect who we are, and continue to be consistent towards representing that to the outside world.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. Thank you. And then kind of on that note, of how to secure, freedoms, uh, it's kind of a classic conundrum of democracy that on one hand, you want to give power to the people to make decisions democratically. However, you also have to ensure that minority rights are upheld. And as you elucidated, there's been many instances in history where the statistical majority actually uses their democratic power to usher in autocratic regimes or oppress minority rights. And so it's kind of a push and pull of how to allow people democratic power while also how to preserve individual rights. And that was something that our founding fathers grappled with a lot, and kind of delivered a constitution that sought to balance it. So I was wondering if, you could talk a bit about, with all of your comparative politics experience and experience abroad, how the US has been able to uphold that balance, how maybe you've seen that balance fail one way or another in other countries you've worked in, and what your thoughts are.
Well, I do think the only way you really have as close to the middle and perfect line on that is if you have an educated population, and I mean the word educated in a bigger form. In other words, an educated population that if something doesn't pass the common sense test, it doesn't pass the common sense test. And so therefore we should try to make sure that we as citizens are engaged enough to hold our own government accountable before we start requesting that other governments are accountable. So if we're seeing in the United States things that do not pass the common sense test, we should act on that. And one of the ways is by voting. That's your civic responsibility. But there are other ways of engaging in dialogue and conversation with people who may not agree with you. It's easy to have a dialogue with someone who agrees with you.
Makes sense. I like that answer as well. It's up to us for sure. And then I guess I'm wondering, you hear a lot about this idea of democratic backsliding, and there's sometimes a perception that, maybe the era of kind of liberal democratic hegemony that developed after World War II, when the US kind of powerfully moved to, or I guess not post World War II, post fall of the Soviet Union, there was kind of this period where it seemed like liberal democracy was kind of the main game in town. And there's a sense among a lot of people that that's slipping. And I'm curious, your perspective as an ambassador, foreign policy experience, leading the Institute of World Politics. Do you agree? Do you think that democracy is in trouble? Or do you think that maybe there's something we're missing and you're optimistic?
Well, I'm very optimistic because I look at our graduates and where they go to work and the impact they have on the United States and the world. So I'm extremely optimistic based on that. But I do fully understand the concept of thinking that our country is backsliding in the United States. Because there are some basic things that create societies that when they get a little loose, it's harder and not necessarily there's a big upside. So when the regular fibers of a society that keep, and each society is different, each country is different religions, different culture, different heritage, different needs. But societies have a way of having specific rules and regulations when it pertains to a family structure or religious structure or educational structure. And when you start dismantling them and you're not quite sure what is acceptable, what is not, and I'm just going to do my thing, or I want to do it my way, and you're not adhering to those basic structures in a society, it weakens the society. And when a society is weakened, it is susceptible to the void being filled by someone or something else. And generally, that someone or something else is an ideology or a person that actually isn't providing more freedom, but is actually going to restrict that freedom. And so we have to be very careful that everyone can do what they want and we're all free and we're all, you know, from the summer of love to the hippie movement, whatever it is. We do know that when a person can't be firm themselves in who they are, what they believe in, where they belong, what's their ethnic background, themselves, it's very hard for them to not only protect themselves, their family, their community, and their country, but it's very hard for them as a human to find purpose. So I would advocate that, yes, society changes and generations change, but the adherence to tradition and basic rules and regulations that pass the common sense test are beneficial for societies, and we should try to keep them, not dismantle them.
Well, thank you so much for your time. You've been amazing, and I loved your remarks. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Proud of you, Tova, traveling the world, future ambassador yourself, or Secretary of State or President, whatever you want to be, Tova. Tova Love Kaplan.
Great questions and great discussion. And we want to take a moment to recognize the students and teachers that are with us today in our audience. We want to welcome D'Angela Hines with students from Emerald Coast Christian Academy and Cami Waynos with homeschool students. So if you're a teacher or student watching and you'd like to shout out, just type your name in the Q&A and we'll make sure and get to you. I think Lacey's going to be bringing on one of our listeners, but while we're doing that, we also want to thank Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM on the radio dial. KKVV airs these podcasts on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific. So thank you to all those listening in Las Vegas. So we wanted, when we started this series, Janine had the great idea of asking our listeners why you celebrate America and what your top reasons are to celebrate America. Freedom, of course, was the number one answer. And we thought it would be fun to bring some of our listeners on camera to talk about the answers that you gave. And we are so excited to have with us today our friend Karen Sue Hensley from Missouri. Karen Sue has been in education for almost 30 years, starting out as a social studies teacher. She's now currently a principal. She's also a licensed pastor, a proud American, and a great supporter of Constituting America. And I might also note mother of Wyatt and Jonah, who are our past contest winners. And Janine, I know that Jonah won the award in your dad's name. So Janine, I'm going to turn to you and ask if you want to talk with Karen for a second.
Karen, hi, how are you?
Hello. I am doing good. How are you?
Fine. It's so great to see you. We wanted to do this. I thought, isn't it time as we lead up to July 4th to let our listeners and our viewers, we polled, what's great? What do you want to celebrate about America? And the number one topic was freedom, as Kathy has mentioned. And so Karen Sue, you were one of the ones who said freedom was one of the greatest things to celebrate about America. So I want you to answer that question. And if you have a question for our fabulous ambassador, I'd love for you to toss a question to her as well.
Okay. Well, what freedom really means to me, I think Ronald Reagan said it very well when he said that freedom is only a generation away from extinction. And I think, Ambassador, you provided a very very well stated that that is very true, that we have to educate ourselves, and it is our responsibilities as citizens to pass on our knowledge of what we've gained and learned, and share it with the next generation so that they can continue. I mean, the US is relatively a young country in comparison to the world, but it's our responsibility to teach others. And so I think that's important for everybody
Sue,
to know.
I want to interrupt you. I want to interrupt you there. I love to hone in on specifics. I know you're an educator. You've been an educator for what, 30 years, right? Thank you.
Almost, yes.
Thank you for doing what has been your educational topic? And then also, when we talk in broad strokes, I think sometimes our young listeners can understand it or it's confusing. When you say education, what do you think is the most important thing that we should teach to the rising generations? And Ambassador, this would be a great question for you. What specifics do we need to know as far as education is concerned?
Well, I taught social studies. I did world history, American history, governments, all of them, including economics. But I really think it is important that we do know our past, because we learn from our past. Ambassador, you shared stuff, even as a history teacher, I did not know. And so we're constantly learning. And I think it's important that we know what's going on also outside our own country, what's going on in other worlds, because we need to, in the other parts of the world, because we need to know, we can look at them and see what we know, what our freedoms are. So like, I know that as a female, I would not have been able to go to college. I would have probably been an 8th grader, maybe, if I was selected to go to college or to school. I may have been able to because my grandparents, most of them only had an 8th grade education. So that may have also. So, but I think it's really important just to know the history, know the background. And we can't change the past, but we can learn from it.
And history is really missing from the schools today. I mean, it's glossed over, and it seems to be this antiquated subject. But history, we say at Constituting America with our 90-day studies, history is a 180. And history holds the key to the future. Shakespeare said the same thing. So I think that it's really important to understand the founding documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, why they were exceptional, what tyranny they were fighting against, what kind of tyranny, and just to understand the principles of our Constitution, how it works, the checks and balances, why they matter. Ambassador, what would you say?
Well, we need to teach facts. So when I went to school as a young child in the United States, we had a class called geography.
Mm-hmm.
And of interest, geography is a curriculum in the schools was taken away out of the curriculum with no public discourse at all amongst anyone. It disappeared as if it had never happened or existed. Then history was taken away as a mandatory subject, replaced by social studies. And when you follow that, what else was taken away during my lifetime in the United States in the K through 12? The necessary basics of math. We had mandatory gym. Why is that important? Because that has to do with health and public health and obesity and a gazillion other things, right? And self-discipline and whatever. We had mandatory geography, mandatory gym, mandatory history classes. I mean, I remember in high school, I had an entire year of Asian history. Little did I know it would come in handy now. But the point being that it was an entire year. And so when we do not teach subjects that are basic critical subjects to be able to then subsequently use that fact to analyze something deeper and learn broader, as an example, I mean, my goodness, you know, you're dealing with people right now, at least in DC, protesting, you know, anti-Israel, pro-Gaza, pro-Hamas, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to go out there, and I've told myself back, I'd like to go out there and say, you know, I'm so confused. Can you just show me on this world atlas where it is?
Well, not to mention they're under Sharia law, a lot of them. Like, what is Sharia law that they
Or
live
anything,
under? I
any
don't know.
subject, right? Any
Yeah,
subject.
But,
Pick the
you know,
subject.
it's interesting. I think that social studies and history is incredibly important. And another thing I would throw out to both of you that I think is really important is philosophy of thought. You know, just philosophy and the art of thinking. I think that is a component that's missing. Let's have a dialogue. Let's have a conversation. Let's be like Hegel's dialectic, you know, there's a philosopher, the Greeks and the Latins and the philosophy and the art of having a conversation. Would you both agree, Karen Sue, I'll go to you first, that this is something that's missing from our education?
Yes. And I think you also mentioned being able to talk civilly to somebody. And even though there is a difference of opinion, being able to express it in a common, rational conversation versus starting to yell at somebody and just telling them that they're wrong and pointing fingers, you know, but being able to be open-minded to hear what others have to say.
Wouldn't we all be fascinated to listen to the Lincoln Douglas debates? I mean, if only, you know, YouTube had existed during the Lincoln Douglas debates, because there would have been an example of two completely opposing points of view, and they would have stood up there in a dignified manner and gone back and forth. And I think that that's what we need to understand is freedom of speech is pivotal for freedom. We're talking about freedom. In closing, I want to ask you both this pivotal question. We're talking about geography and kind of the invasion of one country into another country, which when we look at that, it's just been historic. It's been biblical. It's been from the beginning, you know, it's been one country invades another, and it's just somehow in the DNA of humanity. And it's not that it's right, but it just seems to be, you know, this invasion always seems to happen. But what I think is where it's happening now is it's not going to be with soldiers or tanks. It's going to be with subliminal thought, TikTok, persuasion, false information. So in closing, Karen Sue and Ambassador, I'd love to hear what both of you have to say about that.
I agree. We have it right now. And we've had it for a long time, you know, propaganda, as we've always had it. And how do you, because it's one of the tools of against statecraft, how do you win without going to war? How do you achieve what you want without going to war? And you use those type of tools to achieve that. And
you know, Ambassador, would you not agree, having lived through communism, that communism 101 is to turn the people against each other internally within their own country?
Absolutely. Whether by fear, by force, by fear, or by sheer lying, you know, in realities, when you live under communism, you're listening to someone say something and they're lying. So you're listening to it, you know they're lying. They're speaking to you, they know they're lying, and everyone just goes, you just go on your way. Communism is a lie. And so the point I'm making with that, you have to know your own beliefs, what you stand for, and you have to know facts in order to be able to believe. Because what's in your mind and what's in your heart, no one can ever take away. No one. But you have to know
and
what's in your heart.
I would add to that educating yourself to both points of view would be really important, because what if you've been brainwashed and what you're believing is not the right thing? It'd be really good to hear an opposing point of view, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. Okay, in closing, Karen Sue, our listener award-winning winner here. So what is your thought?
I think, I mean, it's spot on that you have to know, you have to be educated. And, you know, I'll go further than what Ambassador said. Basically, you know, education, you can never take that away from you. I mean, no matter what, no matter how far you go, no matter what training, it cannot be taken away from you. So that is, it's important to be able to know the history, the geography, you know, the background information of everything as much as you can, so that you can understand what's happening now and what could happen in the future.
Well, and I would add to that in closing that it's important with our educational system in our higher levels in college, where they might be getting brainwashed, to really make sure that what you're being taught is correct. You know what I mean? So to hear opposing points of view and to be able to listen and then have a common sense, because someone may be being fed a communist doctrine in the college campuses, and, you know, or a radical theory that may not be the right kind of history. So it's just really, I think, important to know founding principles, and then to be able to kind of educate yourself and say, I'm going to think outside the box. I'm not going to be pigeonholed, and I'm going to make sure I hear different points of view, so I can make an educated, and Ambassador, I think you said this word, you know, common sense principles. Right, Ambassador?
Absolutely. Common sense leads. We're pro common sense.
Well,
So,
if
All
we're right,
right, what a great discussion. Thank you
Yeah,
so
right.
much, Kathy. I'll toss it back to you.
yes, and we are right at the top of the hour. Ambassador, thank you. It's been a fabulous episode. And
Well,
thank you, Janine
you
and
very
Hoda
much.
and Sharon Sue. I do want to just close with a couple of comments from our listeners very quickly, because we've got some listeners who've weighed in here. Robert Zimmerman says, freedom is not asking what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. Said well by JFK years ago. He also said, the story is real and appreciate it. History repeats itself, and we should recognize that and study it. And then Hope Mucklow said, wow, this is so informative and important. Thank you so much for coordinating Ambassador Voss to be the guest today. We learned so much. And Robert Spiegler says, know the truth and then teach the truth. So we had, thank you to everyone for your comments.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you. Thank y'all.